I was on vacation recently to a part of Western Sweden called Skog, where most of my family on my mother's side is from, and where we own a house that we usually stay in over the summer. Now in this community there is a modest but beautiful church located right next to the water in a really idyllic landscape. And this church and its history is interesting for many different reasons, if you're into that sort of thing at least, but primarily for two reasons. One of them is the very location of the church itself. The building that stands today doesn't date too far back. It was actually built in 1762 and rebuilt or renovated in 1802 after much of it had been tragically destroyed in a fire. But preceding this, there had been two previous churches standing at this very location, the oldest of which dates all the way back to the 13th century, making it one of the oldest in the region. Now what's really interesting is that all these churches are in the vicinity of a hill or elevation in the landscape. And this hill is known in Swedish as Klockkullen, which translates to something like the clock hill or the hill of the clock. Excavations at this location has found that this was a kind of graveyard dating back to the Iron Age in pre-Christian times. Graves have been found along with shards of pottery, which points to this conclusion. Some of these finds have led to the general assumption that this hill used to be some sort of ritual space or cultic place for pre-Christian religious traditions. The fact that the old church was built at this very specific location is very interesting from a historical point of view. It seems to be a case of Christian appropriation of older traditions in a strategy to more easily gain converts. If one builds the ritual space, the new ritual space of a new religion in the same location of the old tradition, this avoids dramatic breaks with the past and makes transition and conversion much smoother. In fact, this was a very common practice by many of the Christian missionaries, and one that was largely very successful. This strategy of taking older ideas, places, and holidays that was celebrated or practiced by the people of these new regions that one was venturing into, and giving these traditions a new Christian clothing. Another example of this relates to the Christian holidays of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, which, at least when coming to Western Europe, began to be celebrated on November 1st and November 2nd, at the exact same time that the old Celtic festival Samhain was being held, possibly, or I should say probably, in a similar strategy of smoothing out the conversion. Now, Samhain is, of course, a festival that is now strongly associated with the modern holiday of Halloween. And in fact, both Samhain and All Souls and Saints' Day and their sort of syncretism or synthesis is what makes up a lot of what we associate with Halloween today. And I covered this in a previous video in my Shocktober series, which you can find on the channel. Now, the second aspect of this location that is very interesting is, of course, the old churches themselves. The two older churches, one from the 12th century and the other from the 17th, can still be seen today, at least partially. One has found the foundations of these old buildings so that one can see their size and general form still today. The 12th century church might be one of the oldest in the entire region of Sweden, and thus is a memory of a time when Christianity was relatively new here. Now, this is what I love about studying history and religion, as one can often imagine what it must have been like for the people living here, and wonder over what their experience of religion was. The church was placed right next to the lake, and one can picture how people from different parts of this larger community arrived perhaps by boats and walked up these stone steps to the church. And what did the service look like? How many people visited regularly? This is 800 years ago, and it's almost impossible to imagine what the world would have appeared like to them, but it is really exciting to think about and wonder. This is just one church in a small community, and yet it contains so much history. So many people have been here, so much has happened. And this is true in almost every other place like this. It gives us a look into the past and a relatively early Christian community, but it also tells us very interesting things about the very spread of the religion and how the transition from pre-Christian to Christian times worked. So the next time you drive by something like a church or an old building, remember that it probably has a lot of interesting things to tell you. I'll see you next time.